Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Xojo webinar. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. I'm happy to introduce this week's guest speaker, Jeremy Cowgar, who is going to be giving us a talk about introspection with Xojo. So, Jeremy, all yours.
Thank you very much, Paul. And my name is Jeremy Cowgar, as Paul said, and I work for a company called Advanced Medical Presence Solutions. And basically what our company does is we audit hospital bills for insurance companies and third-party administrators, letting them know if the hospitals are billing correctly, if there are exuberant charges or medically necessary, etc. And the software that we use to do that is written in Xojo. We have client-side software, a couple web apps, as well as desktop applications that work on Windows and OS X. And I am the director of IT there, but it is a small company, so I wear all sorts of hats, my favorite of which is programming, my first love. So, with that said, this is going to be an introduction to introspection. I'm going to assume that you do not know much, if anything, about introspection, but I am going to assume that you have a working knowledge of Xojo. So, what is introspection? It is looking inside and inspecting yourself. However, this isn't philosophy, so you guys have probably come here in order to learn what introspection is in computer science. And that is simply to be able to examine properties, methods, and objects at runtime. And down below here I have a couple little examples in Xojo, just one-liners that we will get into and learn how to use. So what are we going to learn today? We're going to learn the basics of introspection. We're not getting advanced into it, but we're going to learn how to get and set properties, how to call constructors, and actually methods is on the list, but I don't think we're going to get to that. We are going to learn how to instantiate a new object via introspection and how to access property attributes, which some of you may be aware of or not, the fact that they exist. And also when and when not to use introspection. And we're going to be doing all of this not so much through slides, but through examples. And with that, we're going to get started on a very first example, which is more of an educational exercise. And the way that I like learning is with live coding. So I'm going to attempt to do some live coding here, and hopefully I don't make too much of a fool of myself. So we're going to create a new console application that is going to be able to copy and clone an object. And to do that, we're going to create a simple person object, and we're going to give the person a name and an age, very simply. And on our console application, we'll implement the run event and create ourselves a new person. Use John Doe, and we're going to make John Doe be 33 years old. As a little helper, I'm going to come over here and give us a little way to inspect the properties at the console. So to run our application to begin with, if we just say, oops, there we go, goofing up already. I need to set a return type. And we run the application, and we should see that John Doe is 33 years old. Now the goal of our first example is to copy this information from person 1 to person 2. And we would want to do get info, and it should be the same. Now, before you work with introspection, or can do anything with introspection, you have to get the type information of the object that you're going to be inspecting, or the object type, I should say. And to do that, you access the introspection, and you can use a method. Well, there's two ways to get type information, and we'll go over the second way here in just a little bit. But this right here will get the type information that Xojo needs to look into the person class and determine what's going on inside of that. And the type that we'll be dealing with is introspection.typeinfo. Now, it's important to note that this type information object that we've gotten back is not associated with any given instance of a class. It is associated with the class, and it can be utilized with any instance of that class. So once we have the type information, we can go ahead and loop through the various properties. And in our case, we have age and name. So I'm going to use a for each loop. And again, inside of the introspection namespace, there's a class called property info. And the type information that we got has many methods, but the one that we're interested in here at this point in time is the get properties. That is going to populate this prop variable one by one with all of the properties of the class, age and name. Now, it's important to know here, you cannot, although this returns array, you can't say that the first element of the array returned here is equal to your first property and the second element to your second property. So when you're working with introspection, you pretty much have to loop through to find the properties that you want to deal with. Now, we are going to be copying from person 1 to person 2. Which has already been instantiated, but it's empty. As a matter of fact, to prove that it's empty, we'll go ahead and add in get info on that as well. Now, we have the property, and property has, again, various attributes and methods that you can call on it, but the one that we're interested in is the value. And the value will return or set the property that it represents via a variant. And it does take a parameter. In this case, we're going to get the value of this property out of our person 1 object, and we're assigning it to the same property of the P2 object. So theoretically, if I do anything wrong here, if I hit the run, we should see first, this is our one that we constructed ourselves by hand, and here we have an empty person 2, and the third example is that we have John Doe is 33 years old. So our properties have been copied properly. Now, one thing that you might want to do, since we are reading and writing these properties, we may want to go in and make certain that this particular property we can read and this particular property we can write, because we're doing both in this case. We're reading the property from P1 and writing to P2. Another thing that you might want to do here in an if statement is make certain the property is public. Introspection really, even though you can access private and protected properties, that's not what it's designed for, and probably not a good idea. So just double checking that our application continues to run. We still have John Doe, 33 years old. And I am going to make all of these examples available after the webinar. So don't feel as though you have to be copying this down. but there we go. Now, this is not very handy if you want to use this over and over and over. We put it right here in the main code. So what I'm going to do is create a module called Introspection Helpers. If I can spell it. That we will use throughout the webinar today. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this code, make it a new method, and I'll call it copy object. Now you'll notice that in my method here I used object as the type because we want to make this copy object a generic method that would work on any of your simple classes that you may have. So this leads us to, since this is a generic method, it leads us to the first problem and the second example of how to get type information. We do not want to make this generic method hard-coded to say it's only going to work on a person class. So introspection provides another way of getting type information, and that is underneath the introspection module, and it's called getType. Now the difference between these two is that getType will get introspection data from an instantiated object, to whereas getTypeInfo will get introspection information from a class name. So in this case, we're definitely going to get from the source object. We're not going to do a bunch of error checking in the webinar. That's above and beyond what this webinar is about. This webinar is really about introspection. But if you were to use this method right here, source and destination, and pass in different object types, you're likely going to cause issues. And that should be checked for if you are going to be utilizing this in any type of production code. So if we go back to our run, we should now be able to get rid of all of this code and say copy object P1 to P2, and we should have the same results. However, my P2 I need to change to destination and source since we made this a generic. And we have the same result. John Doe is still 33 years old. And you'll see me say that's just a habit that I do all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and give that thing a name. So we have copy object. Now, it still could be made easier if we introduce something called cloning. Instead of copying the object, we would like to do something such as clone object. And get rid of the necessity to create a new person and then copy the person from one to the other. Now, clone object is then, again, going to be a generic method, so it's going to return an object type. Thus, we have to cast it into a person. And again, you need to be careful when you're doing this to check the types that are passed and what you're actually going to be doing there. So we create a new method in our introspection helpers, and we're going to call this clone object. Pass in an object, and we're going to return an object. And we're going to have to get our type information again of the source object, and we're just going to assume that the destination is also going to be of that type. Now what we have to do a little bit differently here is we now have to construct a brand new object of this exact same type. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to look at the introspection data and try to find a zero parameter constructor. And here again in the namespace, I'll let you look here just for a second. you can see that there's all types of classes and available information Introspection provides. But what we want to look at this particular time is constructor information. And just like we loop through each of the properties, we're going to loop through a list of constructors. Again, you cannot assume that the first constructor is going to be the first constructor listed in your person class or any class you're dealing with. So we're going to call on our type information, the getConstructors method, and we're going to check to see, you see your getAttributes, parameters, invoke, private, public, etc. Or we're going to check and see if the parameters, the U-bound of the parameters is -1, meaning it takes no parameters. And if that is the case, we are going to store that constructor into our zero constructor variable, and we're going to exit the loop. Now you should say is nil then handle error. Actually, zero constructor is nil, but there again, we're not going to go through error handling in this webinar. So we are going to create a new destination object, and we're going to take our zero constructor, which we hope is populated, and simply call invoke on it. Since this constructor does take 0 parameters, which we've gotten up here, we do not have to pass any parameters. If you were going to call a method or a constructor that took parameters, this invoke does take a param array of variance. So now that we have a destination object of the same type as our source, we're simply going to reuse our copy object method, and we're going to send it the source, and we're going to send it the destination, and then return our destination. And here again, we go back over to our run event and clone object. We'll see if this works. And there we go. We have person 1, John Doe, is 33 years old, and our person 2, John Doe, is 33 years old. Now, just for the fun of it, after we've created a clone of our original person 1, I'm going to go ahead and change person 1's name to be Jack Smith. And we'll print that information back out, and if all works properly, we should see that even though we changed person 1's name after we cloned person 2, person 2 still remains John Doe. So we indeed do have a copy of the object. We're not pointing to the exact same object as person 1. Now, what one can do, this is kind of clumsy right here, so you can obviously make this easier for your users utilizing your class, other developers you work with, or yourself using the class by creating a method called clone and make it return a person, and simply do the typecast here. And we're going to in this method, we're going to clone ourselves. So we can now simplify this to that. And our person 2 is still John Doe, who is 33 years old. So this is a very brief and quick introduction to introspection, and I'm going to stop and take a look at the questions, if any, since this is the first that we've dealt with, and I do not see any questions, so we're going to continue right on. Now, when to use introspection? This is likely to be a debated subject, and ultimately you're going to need to make this decision for yourself if introspection makes your application easier to understand, if it reduces a significant amount of workload, if it's necessary in order to use introspection or not. But there are a couple guidelines that I came up with. It's kind of difficult to say use introspection in this area. So I'm just giving some examples and some different guidelines to go by. Serialization and deserialization of simple properties. That is a prime example of introspection. Now, what I mean by simple properties are strings, integers, doubles, etc., intrinsic types, simple properties. And we'll look at an example later of complex properties and why that might be difficult to deal with introspection. Prototyping. I do this quite a bit whenever we are creating up a new scenario and it's likely to be changing very rapidly. You might want to use introspection to just take away some of the code that you have to deal with, like the clone object that we just have went over. Replacing boilerplate code. In some types of classes and objects that you may work with, requires a fair amount of setup, which could be made easier with introspection. And our very last example that we're going to go over today is actually an example of replacing some boilerplate code with an option parser class. Now, when not to use introspection? When you're working with a single class. If you're working with a single class, you don't need introspection really, because you know what that class does. You know how to interact with it right in Xojo. The same thing with known methods and properties. If you know the methods and you know the properties, there's no real reason for introspection. Again, introspection is looking at runtime to look into an object and see what's going on inside of it. So a lot of times when you utilize introspection, you're giving up compile time checking, which is very valuable. It makes our programs have less bugs. Now, you'll notice that these are in yellow. If you notice that you have multiple items on this yellow list that you're hitting up against, probably means you shouldn't use introspection. One of them, because you're lazy. You might have a class with 20 properties, and you think, oh boy, I don't want to create a manual clone object because I got to type in 20 lines of code. Probably not the best reason to use introspection. Now, a definite reason not to use introspection is if you have an existing language construct that would do the job. For example, you could use introspection to create a generic string method which looks at a class and sees if it has a name property and return that as the string representation. Or if it doesn't have that, maybe you have an ID property. But in that case, you should probably use a class interface. So look at existing language constructs first. If you want to peek and poke at protected or private properties, that's not the case to use introspection. If you find that you need to be looking at private and protected properties, it either means you're doing something wrong or the class is designed wrong. So maybe you should think about redesigning the class or talking to the author of the class and determining why that particular property that you so badly want access to is private or protected. Maybe they have a very good reason for it. But introspection is not created to look into areas of classes that you shouldn't be messing with. This poor boy right here has probably spent the day trying to debug his code, figuring out what is going on, because he has utilized introspection in one of these manners that he shouldn't be. Introspection can create some code that could be difficult to understand and debug if used improperly. Now, don't take that as saying I shouldn't use introspection. introspection can be very valuable in the right situation. And in the right situation, it can make code more concise, it can make you more agile, and it can create code that is much easier to understand. So I see that we have a question here. Okay. It deals with simple. When I said simple properties. Let's go back here, and what am I talking about by a simple property? Take, for example, a string. When you are going to copy or duplicate a string, it is an immutable object. It does not change. So when you copy it, you've created a new instance. Now, try to serialize a text input string, which might be open and have read the first 10 lines of a file. How actually are you going to serialize that type of a property? I suppose that you could do it, but you're going to be getting into some extensive code and complicated code that again, probably difficult to debug and problematic. I found I can't close my questions while I'm in Keynote. So let's move on to our second example of serialization and deserialization. I'm going to continue to work with this one, even though I named it copy. We're going to keep our person class. And in the description of today's webinar, I actually said that we're going to serialize and deserialize from XML. There's a fair amount of code that goes into just getting the XML document up and running and adding properties. So I hope that no one minds I've actually changed that. We're going to serialize and deserialize to JSON, which is a lot easier of a serialization method to work with. Allows us to focus on the actual introspection and not so much on how to create an XML document. So we're going to go ahead and keep our person here, and we're going to serialize to a JSON object. So that would mean that we probably need a JSON object. And I'm going to turn this compact to false just so that the output is a little bit prettier for us to look at. Now, again, whenever we're doing this, we need to get the type information of the object that we're going to be looking at. And that is going to be P1 in this case. And again, I want to reiterate that this TI variable has no connection to the P1 instance. It is simply looking at the P1 instance to finally derive that it should get the introspection data for the person class. So this TI is not related to P1 directly. And again, we're going to loop through our for each property inside of our person class. And we're going to check to make certain that it is public, the property is public, and we can read it and we can write it. Because in this example, we want to serialize to a JSON object and then deserialize from that JSON object. So we need to make sure we can both read and write the property. Now, I'm going to assume that you guys know how to work with JSON, but JSON, in short, works an awful lot like a dictionary. And for the most part, this could be a dictionary, and this code would still work. But what we're going to do is we're going to, in our new JSON item, we're going to set the value of, again, the property info class has all kinds of attributes with it, and one of them is called name. So we're going to use the name as the key of this particular value, and then we are going to assign the JSON value, property name, to be the property value of our person1 object. Now here is where this type information gets linked, or we access in the person1 instance. And believe it or not, this is all we need to do to serialize to JSON. We can do a print JSON to string. Actually, that's because we're going to reuse that a little bit later. We're going to print the serialized value from our object. And here's our JSON object. We have a name of John Doe and an age of 33. So serialization was very simple to JSON, and that's why I chose JSON. We didn't have to go through a bunch of boilerplate code. Now, let's just do this. And let's now go ahead and make this reusable. Again, nobody wants to do this every single time that they want to serialize a JSON object. So I'm going to copy this code, and down here in our introspection helpers, we're going to create a new method, and we're going to call it toJSON, and we're going to pass in O as an object, and we're going to return a JSON item. Now, I'm not going to make the same mistake, hopefully. Right here is the object coming in, so we want to get the value from the object coming into this method, and we also want to get the type of the introspection data from the object we passed. So to make certain that this still works, let's go ahead and take away that and say toJSON p1. And we should be able to get rid of all of this data, or code, I mean. And our class still works. There's the Xojo representation, and there's the JSON representation of our class. So we now have a string that is the serialized version of our class, and presumably we would wish to deserialize that data as well. So to deserialize, instead of creating code right here, I'm going to come over here and know that we're going to move it to introspection helpers. So I'm just going to create it in introspection helpers. And I'm going to say from JSON. And give it a destination object. And the way that we're going to use this is we'll say dim_p2 as new person. And we're going to say from JSON. Actually, we're going to pretend that we, excuse me, we're going to pretend that we read this back from a string. And we're going to pass in the serialize to create ourselves a new JSON object. And then we're going to say from JSON and pass in our JSON object that we got from the serialized string and where we want it to be deserialized to. And we're going to type in our little handy dandy function here, get info. Now, obviously, this is not going to run. Actually, it probably will run, but it won't work. So we need to come here and implement our from JSON. Again, we always have to start off with getting the type information. And in this case, we're going to get the type information from our destination object that we passed into our method. And then we are going to do our loop through properties that you've seen quite a few times now. And we're also going to do our is public can read and can write check. And you can probably guess what's going to happen here. The destination value is going to be set to whatever the JSON object that we passed in has for that given property name. Now, just a quick note here. I'm assuming that everything in the JSON object is aligning up with the person object. I did use a lookup. So if the JSON object does not have the property, it will be assigned nil. But you may want to go through and do some checking to determine if the JSON object has the property. If it has it, then assign it. And that way, if you have default values set on your class here, this from JSON just doesn't simply replace it with nothing. But for our example right here, we can just assign it. And I believe that that is all that we're going to have to do to deserialize from JSON. So if we look here, we create a new person, we serialize it to JSON, we get the string representation, and here we then take a string representation, create a new JSON object out of it, deserialize it into a person, and we're going to see if the information comes out the same. And look at that. John Doe 33, John Doe 33, John Doe 33 years old. So we now have introspection helpers already to clone an object, to copy an object, to serialize to JSON, and to serialize from JSON. Now, just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and create a text output stream and finish off this example. We need to get a place to store it. I'm just going to store it here, person JSON. So text output stream, and we're going to write the serialized value and close our stream. So person.json should contain our JSON representation of our object. Now, if we create a new text input stream, open up that exact same file, and instead of doing this, we're going to read all from our text input stream, and hopefully this will work. And it did not. What did I do wrong here? Oh, we need the child. And person 2, John Doe, is 33 years old. Here's our string representation of the object. So let's have fun here, and let's change this to Jane Smith, and let's make Jane Smith be 47 years old. Come back over to our JSON, and I'm going to comment out the part that we are creating the person object and serializing. And this way, it is simply going to deserialize from the object that we just changed, I mean the JSON file that we just changed. It should come out to be Jane Smith, 47 years old. Now, in some of our applications, we store application property or application options this way, preferences. We have a preference class, and we simply serialize and deserialize from JSON. It makes it very easy and very quick. So that is a full example of serialization. If anybody wishes for an example of how to serialize and deserialize from XML, you can let me know. At the end of the slides, you'll see my email address, and I'll be more happy to whip something up for you, since that was part of the description of the webinar today. And Paul, I went past a little bit of halfway. It would be a good time if you want to take it and do a halftime show.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. We particularly like the relaxing sound of the birds chirping in the background as you're coding. It's very zen-like.
I was going to move the birds out of the way, but I forgot.
All right, I have a few polls to run this week, and let's get cracking with those. First poll is, what type of apps do you create with Xojo? All right, our next poll is, do you have a Xojo Pro license? All right, great. Next up is, how long have you been using Xojo? And our last question is, how do you use Xojo? All right, that is all of them. Just checking the question list here, Jeremy. I don't see any outstanding questions.
Okay. So we're ready to go again?
Yes, good to go.
Okay. Going back to the presentation, we have a new slide, and we're going to populate a GUI using introspection. This particular technique I do whenever I'm prototyping new applications. It enables me to very quickly wire up an object, which is how I represent almost all of my data in Xojo, is with a simple object. And when tied together with a class such as ActiveRecord, you can very quickly prototype an application with full database access. And I am going to open up a starting point that we have for this, because I didn't want to create the GUI. I want to focus on introspection. And I did copy in the introspection helpers and our person class so that we can just reuse that here. But other than that, it is simply a couple widgets added, and the widgets have nothing to do with introspection at this point. We're going to go ahead and add all of that. So whenever the window is created, I go through and curate a couple people and assign that to a people array that exists. And the idea of this example is that we're going to be able to go to previous and next and have introspection populate our GUI. And we're also going to be able to take the information from the GUI and populate the object when we hit the save button. So we're going to come here to our introspection helpers again, and we're going to create a new method, and we're going to call it populate GUI. It is going to take a source object and a destination window. And again, I use this with prototyping, and it helps out quite a bit. Now, the trick right here is that we have to loop through the controls to find the control names, and we have to loop through the introspection data. Neither gives us the ability to look them up by name. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a property dictionary, and we're going to get our type again, as we always do, and we're going to loop through our properties and create a dictionary from it so that we can then access at least one side of the introspection data via a name lookup. And we've already utilized the property name method so far, and we're simply going to shove in the property info right into our dictionary so we can use it later. Now we are going to loop through the controls on our window. Now, I should say right here, and this is one of the reasons why I use it for prototyping and not necessarily core code, is that I have named, to get around this and do it rather quickly, I have named the controls, here's name and here's age. Typically when I'm developing an application, I would have age combo box, and my field names and different widget names might not align directly with the objects that I'm putting in there. But for this example, they do. So we can go through the controls that exist on our window and get each one of them. And now we're going to look up our property info from our property dictionary that we previously built. And control has a nice little property on it called name. And we're going to do a lookup on the dictionary. So if it doesn't exist, we don't get an exception. And the default value is going to be nil, which we are then going to check. This is going to be used for the person age, the combo box is, if we look at our window here. And also something I failed to show you guys was right here, whenever the window is created, I go ahead and populate the combo box with ages 1 through 130. And so at this point in time, I believe that we should be able to call Populate GUI. And again, we're going to send in the source object. In this case, we're going to send in out of our people array our person index. And what window do I want to populate? I want to populate self. Save this and see if it works. There's Jane Smith and age 12. And I just realized as I was typing this that there is a little bug in there with zero-based indexing going on here on the combo box. I believe that if we come over here, Jane Smith is actually 11, but we'll let that go. You can see the example and that it is populating. Now, if we take this code right here and violate one of the don't repeat yourself rules, copy it and paste it in here, This push button 1 is my previous button, and we have a next button. And the person index I use as a little counter here, and I simply, on the previous and next, I check to see if we reached the bounds. In this case, did we reach the end of the people array? If so, just keep it the same. Don't increment. Otherwise, we're going to add 1 onto the person index. And then we're simply calling populate GUI with the new person and populating self. And likewise, our previous button, the action on that checks to see if it's 0, set 0. Otherwise, we can go down similar. So it prevents us from getting out of index, or out of bounds. So at this point in time, we should be able to hit next, and you see that we're actually cycling through our array. And we have done hardly any glue code in order to get information from the object into the GUI. Now that leaves populate GUI. We want to be able to save information from the GUI. So we'll create a method here. Actually, we're going to duplicate this method because it's very similar. And we're going to call this one GUI to object. Again, everybody has their naming schemes, and you can name these items whatever you want. But again, we're working with 2 lookups. So, two for loops that we have to deal with. We have to be able to look up one side of it via name. So I'm going to keep this exact same code right here for the dictionary. And then down here, when we loop through the controls that exist in the window, the majority of this is going to stay the same. The only thing we're going to do is, instead of populating a text field and populating a combo box, we're going to in turn flip these around. So, really, I guess that this source should be named destination. Variable names are key in understanding what's going on. Self-documenting code is a fantastic thing. So the property value destination is going to be set to the text of the text field, since we've already determined that this particular control is a text field. And in our combo box, we are simply going to invert that as well and assign the list index to the source property that we're dealing with at this point in time. And then we come over to our actual GUI, and we have a save button. And we should be able to call our new method, GUI to object. And if we get the little help on here, we need the destination object. And that is going to be in the people array, the person index. And we're populating it from self. So here we go. Destination and destination. Changes like that are worth it for self-documenting code. We run, and we can still go forward and back. Let's go ahead and change Jack Smith, and let's call it Jeremy Cowgar, and let's say that I am 24, which I wish I was, and hit the save button. Now, when I go previous and back again, whoops, I guess, sorry about that, guys. I had to select one off the list here because we're doing this very simply with the list index. There you see that the object was actually populated then from the GUI. And again, a technique like this can be used for prototyping or very simple applications you can do this in. But in general, when you get into complex situations, you'll probably want to take your prototype code and do some guess and sets manually through code. And that right there concludes the populate and get back data from a GUI. I do see that it is 1:56. I do have an additional example that takes about 10 minutes or so to go through, so I'm not certain if we want to tackle it now. That example is, I think, pretty cool. It takes a lot of boilerplate code that exists in an option parser setup and is able to utilize attributes on properties and go through and construct a brand new option parser and parse your arguments and store that then data back into a class itself, so that you actually get compile time checking for your command line options. But I guess I will put that up as an example in the download, and if you want to dig in deeper, you can look at it, and you can feel free to email me any questions about the code, comments you have on it, etc., since it is now 1:57. And we're open for questions and answers. I don't think I saw any come across, but again, my name is Jeremy Cowgar. You can reach me at jeremy@cowgar.com, and I have a blog that I should update more frequently, but I don't. But you can view some what I think is neat stuff there. Not always with Xojo, some things with hobbies and programs that I use and various things like that. But that is jeremy.cowgar.com. And Paul?
All right.
It's yours now.
That's great, Jeremy. Some good examples here. I did start picking up a bit of a lag on the video recording at the end, and I'm not exactly sure how that will end up turning out. So it's probably a good idea not to try and continue with your next example.
Okay.
In case that doesn't get picked up properly. But I thought this was great, very well explained, and I think a lot of people should now have a good understanding of how introspection works and what you can use it for.
Well, thank you.
I don't see any further questions here other than people asking if you can continue, but he'll have the example in with the example projects. That'll be available when the recording's on YouTube and from our download page in the documentation wiki. And with that, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank Jeremy again for doing a great job on this. This is a tricky subject and can be challenging to explain, but I think this was great. And next week, our webinar is actually podcast number 2 with special guest Bob Keeney. And at this point, I have no idea what we'll be talking about. So tune in and be surprised, or subscribe to the podcast and get it on your RSS podcast reader after the fact. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.